V'safartacha, Leviticus 25:8 says, and you shall count for yourself 7 weeks of years, and on the 50th year it's a jubilee. That's what we're here to do today, to count 50 years. I'm going to count them with you. 50 years since the Six-Day War, and 50 years since I was admitted to rabbinical school. Those two things are intertwined, not because I want to put myself at the center of the story, but because I think Israel is part of every Jewish person's identity in the United States. In some way, we are privileged to live during this time that Israel exists. The Rambam, Rashi, they could never live during a time that we had control of that land. So what Israel does, and how we perceive it and how we hear it, becomes something of our story. And 50 years is the time Rabbi Shlomo, the chief rabbi of Prague, the Kli Yakar, said is about as much as a person can hold in their head. He said, for the most part, human beings can hold on to what is theirs for only a number of years, until the 50th year, from their 20th year, that is 70 years of age after being born. So I'm 70, and Israel's occupation of the West Bank is 50 years old, and I thought we'd reminisce a little bit about what that time has been like. The story I want to tell you is a cautionary story, because I don't think my rabbinical leadership during that time has been as the time would have required. 50 years ago, you see, Israel fought a war against Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, and it was a war against these nations. Israel took the Sinai and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, it took the Golan Heights from Syria, and it took the West Bank from Jordan. You'll notice I didn't mention Palestinians. The war was between the armies of Israel and Egypt and Jordan and Syria. And in those days, naively so, there was a feeling that when a country lost a war, they would make peace, give up, cede the land, something. It was before the time that we now know all too well of never-ending wars. I want to bring this to you not to justify the blind spot that the American Jewish community or the Israeli leadership had about the Palestinians, but to bring you back to the euphoria that was there at the Six-Day War. Israel, which had seemed so hemmed in, now had room to breathe. The Golan Heights now stood under Israeli control as a buffer between it and Syria. The West Bank was now a buffer between it and Jordan. And the Sinai gave Israel breathing room between it and Egypt. The Jewish community in the United States was elated. Abba even spoke about Israel. He was the foreign minister and defended Israel to the world in impeccable English. There was a poster made of a chassid coming out of a phone booth, opening up his jacket, showing a shin on his shirt in the form of a Superman logo, because he was strong, he was powerful. You can now get that poster on Etsy for $15. It's called Vintage 1967 Jewish Superman Telephone Booth, hippie poster. The Six-Day War didn't just enliven the Jewish community in America, it enlivened the Soviet Jewish community as well. They had been called the Jews of Silence a year before when Elie Wiesel wrote his book by the same title. But that year, the Simchat Torah after the Six-Day War, the Soviet Jews danced in the streets in record numbers. And when I came to the seminary in 1968, there was euphoria there too. There was a book published called Siach Lochamim, Conversations on the War, where Israeli soldiers were talking about how this war changed their vision of what it meant to be a religious person. There was like a religious revival going on. That war seemed miraculous. And Abraham Joshua Heschel of blessed memory wrote a book called Israel, An Echo in Eternity. It was a book he wrote for his friends, non-Jewish friends in the civil rights movement and in the peace movement, to explain to them why Israel was so important and why Israel had to exist after the Holocaust. So I entered the seminary in 1968 and found that euphoria there. And I also found that the Holocaust was ever present on the minds of my teachers. I sat in the seminary sukkah, and I saw David Weiss Halivni and his boyhood friend Elie Wiesel reciting Kiddush together. I went to Dr. Moshe Zucker with a religious problem and said, Dr. Zucker, how can you believe in God? And he said, how can I not? Hitler took everything from me when I was 11 years old, but he couldn't take my Talmud from me. And I slept on dead bodies, and now I teach boys like you how to study Talmud. The Holocaust was in our flesh and blood, and it made Israel and its vulnerability, and it made Israel and its necessity, and it made Israel and its triumph so much more important. But then I heard a third story, another story from John Ruskay. John Ruskay taught me that this Israel that I so valued was bought at the price of Arabs, of an indigenous population, of the Palestinians who were displaced. And Yeshayahu Leibovitz wrote an article that very year in 1968 saying that the occupation of the West Bank would corrupt the occupiers and the occupied equally. But those voices were not heard so much. But in 1973, all those voices and feelings came together when my wife and I went to Israel for my junior year. We started off with a trip to Israel with the USY pilgrimage. We ended up in Kiryat Arba, the new settlement in Hebron. And I met there some people who said to me, you know, you Americans don't understand. Pekuach nefesh is not the highest value. The highest value in Judaism is this land, Hebron. The land that we stand on is the most important thing. I said, oh, I took that into myself. And then the Yom Kippur War happened. And I took into myself the fact that Israel was threatened. And while Jordan didn't attack, I need to be honest and say that the presence of the Golan Heights between Israel and Syria and the presence of the Sinai between Israel and Egypt seemed like a good idea. It was a good idea to have those. They kept us safe. And yet my wife came home and told me that the mental hospital where she worked, Kfar Shaul, used old buildings from an Arab village that was there named Deir Yassin. And of course, I later found out there was a massacre in Deir Yassin, right? Perpetrated by the Irgun, condemned by the Haganah. So all these visions and ideas, Israel's needed, Israel is the redemption of the Holocaust, and Israel is created at the price of the Palestinians' homeland. All that came back with me to America, where I found that John Ruskay and Jerry Serrata and Peter Geffen founded an organization called B'rei Ra. B'rei Ra was in contradistinction to the Israeli political slogan, Ein B'rei, no choice. These American friends of mine were saying there was a choice. There was something we could do with the West Bank other than just stay there. But they never got a chance to speak or engage very much in discussion because they were vilified by the American Jewish community. They lasted just a few years, became a lightning rod for what became the policy of the Jewish community. Don't look, don't talk. And that's been the policy of the American Jewish community for many years, to not see what's going on fully. Well, I finally gave a sermon in 1981 after I became a rabbi that asked very tentatively, has Israel pursued peace? It was a Shabbos morning in August. And I said, the mitzvah of pursuing peace is a mitzvah in and of itself. I asked that question, and afterwards one of the congregants said, that's a danger to the state of Israel. What you said is sophomoric, mystical, I don't know what he meant by that, and a danger to the state of Israel. I was young and naive enough to think, wow, in front of 15 people on a Shabbos morning, in a suburb of Boston, I can be a danger to the state of Israel. Really? I guess I am. Looking back upon it, of course, I wasn't, right? But that's how I was silenced at the time. And then a year and a half later, when the Sabra and Shatila massacres happened in Lebanon, the Jewish community felt ashamed, and I gave them a sermon of comfort, where I had the entire congregation stand up and sing TIkvah together, Liot am chavshi ba'atzenu, to be a free nation in our own land. Free doesn't mean perfect. So I gave my congregation comfort. I should have given them warning in 1982 that the Sabra and Shatila massacre were just part of what was coming. So through all these years of sorrow and the occupation, it's become more and more clear that what Yeshayahu Leibovitz said is true. The occupation will corrupt the occupiers and the occupied. And as the years went on, I met more and more people who told me and made clear to me how costly this was to the Palestinians. When I founded the Rashi School, I met Bernie Avishai, whose book, The Tragedy of Zionism, taught me a lot just from the title. And I heard soldiers speaking from breaking the silence, soldiers who said how being on the West Bank was an impossible moral position for them to be put in. And eventually I had Uri Avneri, the founder of Gush Shalom, 93 and still going strong, come and speak at my synagogue in Winchester. And I went with Encounter to the West Bank. But it seems to me that 50 years after the Six-Day War, the other part of the Kli Yakar's commentary is true. He warns, if you count for yourself, Usvartem Lacha, if you count for your own good and to benefit from it, so that your days are focused on spiritual matters, that is, then you'll have 7 days of weeks of years. They'll be fully years and not another. But if you waste your time uselessly, hoarding and collecting things, then you'll not be able to enjoy the fruits of your labors, the things you have built and the things that you've planted. So I think that I can no longer be so tentative and silent. When Israel conquered the West Bank and Sinai and the Gaza Strip and the Golan Heights, even after giving back the Sinai and the Gaza Strip, the West Bank feels that instead of giving us breathing room, it's become a noose around our neck. I want to be very clear, like 3 points very clearly. The Kli Yakar says 50 years is the most a person can hold in their mind in their lifetime, but it's a short time when it comes to a country. In 1789, the United States embraced and embedded slavery in its Constitution. 50 years after 1789, it's 1839, and the Civil War is still more than a decade away. I pray that the end of the Six-Day War will not be as bloody as the Civil War was. I fear that this situation can continue for another 50 years. I also want to say that I believe deeply that love between people is possible and a very powerful force, and that people can love across boundaries. But I think that is mostly on face-to-face relationships. I fear deeply that the hatred of the other is one of the most binding forces that enables one tribe to be pitted against another tribe. So that this peace that we're looking for, this solution to the echoes of the Six-Day War, is really going to be a peace between people who hate each other. The third thing I want to say is that I'm heartened that there are so many voices among American Jews now regarding Israel. than there were 50 years ago. I'm proud of Truah. I'm proud of J Street, of the new generation of rabbis who make a whole career of social justice and don't just do it on the side of their pastoral work. And I'm heartened by the people running the grassroots organizations that bring Jews and Palestinians together and try to use the force of love to overcome the hatred that's there in the formation of group identity. The next 50 years is in your hands. Take a deep breath, look around, see what's happened, see with clear eyes all that has happened, and keep up the good work.